I do want, before I jump into things, I do want to mention something that I noticed in the survey results from yesterday about audio issues with my computer. Somebody had mentioned that there's like been an audio glitch. Has everybody heard that every once in a while from my computer? Okay, so that's something I've heard about in the last few weeks. I don't know if you can tell, but I've moved my computer. I'm in a slightly different position today because I'm wondering, I don't know if it's the computer itself or if it's this desk I'm using, which kind of wraps around the computer and maybe just causing, I don't know, resonance or some sort of issue with the sound. So if you notice it today, please let me know. I just want to see if, I'm hoping it's not the computer because I don't know how you'd fix that. It doesn't seem like it's a software issue. It might be a hardware issue, and I'm hoping it's not that. So if you could let me know, that would be great. But I will go ahead and share our slides for today. So yeah, let me start by sharing my screen. And so today we are really going to be focused on discussing strategies for applying some of the skills that we've learned this week and using these new skills to develop GIS services and resources at our institutions. So I'm just going to be covering some of the things that we've thought about here at UT as we have built out services and resources that we have developed over the last few years, and just hoping that this, not that button. Hoping that this will kind of prompt a nice discussion today where we can think through some of the potential challenges that we might have applying these new skills and see if we can hopefully develop plans for successfully developing some new things at our campuses through our libraries after this week. And so I'm pretty excited about the activity for today. And this morning session will probably wrap up quite a bit earlier than our other morning sessions, since it's just the one topic really that we'll be covering. And it's not really technical. It's more conceptual and focused on strategy. And yeah, so we might have more time to get into the activities, and maybe we'll even start the activity perhaps a little bit during the morning session so that we can address any questions that might come up. But otherwise, I think today will probably be a bit of a lighter day and a funner day as we really think through how are we going to use what we've discussed during the week so far. Oops, and that should say day 4, not day 3. All right, so the first thing I wanted to talk about are libguides that might come out of this, right? And I'm hoping that will be one of the things that you all feel comfortable perhaps creating or augmenting if there's already existing guides, perhaps about things like ArcGIS Online that you've prepared for your institution, or maybe coworkers, folks that you work with in the libraries have prepared for your institutions. And one of the strategies that we've utilized here at UT that's been pretty effective is looking at what other universities are doing and drawing inspiration from their GIS libguides. But one of the things that I think it's important to be cognizant of when you're doing that is also considering, are the libguides being developed for these other campuses? In what way are they geared specifically to the unique situation at that campus? And how might that situation be different, where you're working? And, specifically, I think the best example of this is with ArcGIS Online. As we found out this week, our different campuses could, have different policies regarding use of ArcGIS Online. Do we use single sign-on? Do we use ArcGIS Online authentication? Are we assigning certain privileges to users by default, like geocoding privileges, or do they have to request those specifically? Do they have the ability to create groups? Do they have the ability to access notebooks? So what things are turned on, what are not? And when we're looking at what other institutions have created, we want to make sure that we're adjusting that if we're moving material or trying to emulate what we see in these other libguides, so that we're not putting any information that might not apply to our institution, or even if it technically does apply, right? There's not a technical discrepancy between how things are implemented at each campus. The relationships we have with others who are perhaps managing ArcGIS Online at our campuses could be different. So One of the things that I try to do every time I create a guide that addresses use of ArcGIS Online on campus is to check in with our liberal arts information technology services department that actually they were the original sole administrator for our ArcGIS Online instance, and making sure that these new guides that I'm developing that are still in draft mode, that haven't been released, that they don't foresee any issues with the content that's gone into those, because I would hate to find myself in a situation where I created something that is telling users on campus to use ArcGIS Online in a particular way, and for whatever reason maybe that presents an issue for our other liberal arts IT group that is managing that instance. So collaboration with others, and making sure that stakeholders who might be affected by what we're putting in libguides, making sure they're consulted is going to be a good policy just to have in general. And we want to make sure that our libguides are not creating more work for us, right? They're not going to cause problems. They're not going to be incorrect, and folks are running into issues, and now we're getting flooded with emails, or that it's going to lead folks to do things in a particular way that is going to surprise other folks on campus who might not be expecting that. One of the other things I'll mention here is, with libguides, I mean, that, in my mind, there are probably, quite a few libguides that I might create if I had a little more time, and, things that are a little bit lower priority compared to, the other projects I'm engaged in. And I think this is probably going to be true at all our campuses, that there's a limited amount of bandwidth that we all have to take on certain projects, and libguide development is a project, and we want to make sure that when we develop these guides that they're well developed, that we're putting in the time and effort to make them easy to understand and find, and all of that. And so it's important to prioritize guide creation based on what you think that estimated impact is going to be for your campus community. And here, and this is something I think we'll perhaps talk about a little bit more as the morning goes on, and perhaps into the afternoon as well after we complete the activity. But as you perhaps start to reflect back on the week and think about what we've covered, we've covered some pretty diverse topics. This wouldn't all fit into a single libguide. So at your campus, right, I mean, potentially there's multiple libguides that could come out of this week. If you don't already have a guide about ArcGIS Online, or libraries databases, or use of web GIS related tools, so using QGIS to produce web maps, or using Python and Google Colab to produce web maps. And so those are things that you might want to develop guides about. And assuming you didn't have a guide about any of those things, which one do you think would be highest impact for your campus? And perhaps something else to consider here as well is what is most manageable. So some of those guides might be a little bit easier for you to create than others, low-hanging fruit. Wouldn't require as much investment of your time to get something up there that would be useful. And so maybe those are things that should be prioritized as well, just to check it off if it's not going to be as much work as something that's more involved, like an ArcGIS Online guide might be. One of the strategies that I mentioned earlier this week that's also a good way to think about this issue of prioritization is to use reference emails and consultation questions that you receive to help decide which guides might be best to create. And sometimes I'll get questions that I wasn't expecting. And once I see those pop up once, twice, three times, that's a hint to me that this is something that folks on campus are wondering about, even if it wasn't something that I was initially thinking of. But that will start to stand out to me once I hear a question a few times, and that's a hint that a guide might be needed, because other folks on campus are probably wondering, and they might have asked about it yet, right? If I'm getting questions, there's probably others who have that same question. Something else to consider is having a plan for libguide maintenance. So GIS libguides can be like I'm sure a lot of our libguides are, but it's kind of tricky to manage in that things are going to change, especially software. I know I've had to go and update guides where the process for doing something in ArcGIS Online has changed. And so I need to go back and modify what I had originally had there, because it's telling people to do things that don't apply anymore. the buttons have different wording, or the menu options are no longer the same. And so it's something that the more LibGuides we create, the more things that are out there, the more information that's out there that could potentially become obsolete or incorrect. And so with each guide we create, there's more to manage and keep up. And broken links are always a big issue as well. So having a strategy for periodically reviewing those, or trying to go back every so often and check and make sure links are still working, always a good idea as well. And when you're developing ArcGIS Online guides specifically, as I mentioned, just make sure that you're checking in with the administrator of your ArcGIS Online account. And if you are the administrator, which I know a few of you have administrative privileges for that, maybe you're a little more free unless you're collaborating with others at your institution. You're not the sole administrator, and just wanting to make sure that everybody is on board with anything that you're putting out there. And so today we're, for the morning session, I've just kind of structured this based on different types of services and resources that we create. So the first one here, obviously, that we're addressing is LibGuides. But before we move on to discuss consultations and talk about workshops that we might create that could come out of this, are there any questions about LibGuides? And I'd be glad to show some examples of LibGuides that we've developed here at UT Austin if there's interest in seeing those.
Michael, I'm just going to interject and say one of the things that we have talked about occasionally, and I think really you've probably discussed this within your unit, is a strong desire to have a visible connection or establish that kind of information exchange and support rapport with other offices on campus, like the Office of the Vice President for Research, or I'm always focused on graduate students, so the Office of Graduate Studies. And I think that as you develop things, and you have many examples to share, it's okay to reach out to contacts that you might have in those offices and suggest that they link to the LibGuide. I mean, I know in a way it makes it more discoverable, and if there are things that need to be maintained, you might give those higher priority as information shifts or circumstances change. But I just want to put a plug out there for something that you suggested really earlier in your comments, that being how to collaborate and think about how to embed the links to the information that you work hard to put together and maintain, so that they are more visible, findable, and they speak to an existing relationship with external offices, other units. We say CSUs, but institutes, units, departments across the university landscape, because it reflects well on you, and people then are reminded of you occasionally if they have cause to browse their own sites or look for information there.
That's a great point, Jennifer, and something that I hadn't really yet focused on this morning, which is getting the word out about new LibGuides that you produce and making sure those are accessible and findable. Absolutely, that is a great strategy, is reaching out to partners on campus that might be able to help you get the word out, to make it, for instance, geography departments on your campus, geospatial research centers, any groups that are involved in GIS and geospatial research. If you develop a new guide, it might be an excuse to reach out, send them an email and say, there's this new guide that's available. Another opportunity to get folks to look at what you have developed if they haven't previously maybe looked at it or haven't looked at it in a while. So I think it's a great thing to mention. I'll also say that our LibGuides, our GIS LibGuides specifically for our campus, are pretty well trafficked. And it's been pretty amazing to see just how much growth there is in use of these LibGuides, because it's pretty easy to track the statistics over time and see which ones are getting more use than others. And some of the guides I've created have been extremely popular. Others are not quite as visited, and the most trafficked ones are about installing software, so just folks trying to get started. And I think that that's probably mostly because faculty at the beginning of the semester, they need to make sure all of their students are set up with their, ArcGIS Online account. They need to make sure they're set up with QGIS, ArcGIS Pro, or whatever they happen to be using that semester. And having those guides available is really useful for them to point their students to without them having to rewrite those instructions each time, or update the process in their lab activities or anything like that. They can just point to the LibGuide that is always up to date. So that I think is a really good thing to mention as well. Is we can create the best LibGuides in the world, but nobody's finding them and making use of them, then they're not having that impact that we want them to have for the campus community. And kind of related to that, right? The LibGuides themselves can also be a platform for promoting and other services and resources that we develop. So, I mean, here, for instance, on the LibGuide that we see here, presented as an example, which is our main GIS and geospatial data services LibGuide kind of homepage. We've made it really easy to schedule consultation appointments. There's the pretty prominent button there on the upper right side. And by clicking that button, folks can pick a time to meet with me, and they can see my availability on my calendar. And so that has helped facilitate the process of arranging consultations appointments. It's a lot easier than it was just a few years ago when you had to send an email and go through that and try to work out a time that is good for everyone that's involved. And thinking through how you can use the LibGuide to drive attention towards other services that you're hoping to promote for the campus community. And also, it's a little bit farther down here on this homepage, but we also have a list of upcoming events for that are related to GIS on campus that we're organizing through the library. So really, it's also a platform for promoting and making accessible other services like consultations and special events. Any other questions about LibGuides or comments? Anybody doing anything differently at your institutions, or thinking about different things specifically as you're creating guides, perhaps related to GIS, or maybe just LibGuides in general, and now thinking.
And this is Sylvia. What here at SME, honestly, we don't have LibGuides on GIS. We have a web page that references some of the things that you have in your LibGuides. We have a web page that points like there's a button for you if you want to access the resources, the different platforms. A page that would tell you about the event and activities we have. Another web page, another button that would take you to a page if you want to contact any one of us working as part of the Spatial Literacy Initiative. So we have a web page that has different buttons for all those different things. So we have not created LibGuides in the sense that you have. And then for us, because in the past, we've been having like lots of questions that come about how can I access ArcGIS, or how can I get a pro account or whatever. So what we did was we asked we have a small GIS lab and we have TAs who work there. So what we did was ask one of them to create a story map that gave all the different information about how you can get access to ArcGIS Online, how you can access Pro and story maps, stuff like that. And that you can access that through the web page, but we don't have LibGuides as such. So.
Yeah, and that's a great point, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be a LibGuide. I mean, any page that you have the ability to create. I know that LibGuides tend to be pretty common at libraries, but doesn't mean that we're all using LibGuides for this purpose. And absolutely, if you have the ability to administer a page of some sort on your website that you can customize and add content to, and that would work just as well. And so, yeah, it's not about the LibGuide specifically and using the LibGuide interface, but it's about the content. And so that's a great point, Sylvia. Are there any others that are using either like just web pages or maybe an alternative to LibGuides, or are most folks using LibGuides at their institution?
We have libguides, and we have one very sad libguide related to GIS. But I think even before we talked about this, I think it was day 1 or 2 when we got in contact, or find out who your ArcGIS Online admin is, and thinking about like next steps after this week, following up with her and asking because we don't have public information. So I would like to know, who can use it? Is it anyone affiliated with the institution? Does it depend on majors or minors, grad students only, and faculty, things like that. So I have a better understanding, and then putting that information on a libguide so that there is some public information available, because it's not right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you can get the word out a little more, widely on your campus, that might really drive adoption of ArcGIS Online. And yeah, because if folks don't know it exists or that it's available, they're not going to use it. So yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the great things about libguides is that they can really help folks understand what is available to them, and make sure that the resources that your campus community has access to are actually being utilized, and then not being underutilized in research when they're available, and they could really be beneficial. All right. Does anybody want to see any specific examples or look at libguides that might address any particular topics?
I'm imagining, I think I know, I haven't checked though, that some of the links to your libguides are in our suggested resources, Michael. But Cynthia, you had mentioned at one point that you found a particular aspect or part of the libguides Michael created really to be really helpful. Maybe we can just show that one, and we can talk a little bit about, from the developer and from the user perspective, what that looks like. I don't know. I might have called Cynthia out at a bad time.
Yeah, it looks like she might have stepped away for a minute.
But I guess, my point being, it's rare that the person who develops the guide and a user who has independently made use of that content get to talk to each other. I mean, it happens in consults, but not like professional to professional. And so I think that that's another aspect of value that having interacted with each other could bring as a result of this sprint. And I imagine that we could reach out to each other and then say, hey, take a look at this and see what you think, or what from your experience is missing, so that I'm accomplishing my desired outcome or impact.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I hope that y'all feel comfortable after this sprint this week, especially reaching out to each other. I really hope that this has been effective at kind of helping us build up these relationships and foster the sense of community, so that when we see things on maybe each other's websites or libguides, that we feel comfortable reaching out and asking questions. Or and I'll also say that for our part at UT, if you see anything on these libguides that you want to emulate and put up at your institution, that's great. That's I mean, how hopefully we can all be more efficient and effective at our campuses is learning from each other. I mean, I know I've learned a whole bunch this week from all of you, and hopefully this just continues, and those barriers to collaboration just start to fall down further and further as we work together more and more. And I think it's going to benefit all of us if we feel comfortable with that. All right. Well, and we can always talk about these more in the afternoon session. I have a feeling more questions will be prompted by the activity, which, like I said, I'm really excited for everyone to start working on here. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to talk a little bit about GIS workshops. And some of the things that we might want to consider coming out of this sprint week, and how we might be able to utilize the new knowledge we've gained to perhaps build out new workshops on our campus for folks that might be interested in learning more about these topics themselves. And one of the first things that I think might be useful for us to reflect on is who on our campuses might benefit from gaining the same knowledge that we picked up this week, right? Who would want to know these things, who could use it in their work, and how would we reach them, right? One of the challenges we have each semester is trying to figure out what our promotional strategy is for our workshops. What mailing lists are we going to reach out to? Are we going to physically advertise anything, putting up a poster or a flyer? Obviously, the last year and a half has been very crazy, trying to rework our strategy for getting the word out about events, which have all been virtual, of course, since March of last year, and really trying to make sure that we are reaching that intended audience, or at least they're aware of it. If they're not showing up because of scheduling conflicts or other issues, that's one thing, but it's particularly painful if you do a great job creating an amazing event, but the promotional aspect isn't there, and then folks aren't even aware that it's happening, and wanting to make sure that those who could potentially be prospective participants, or at least seeing a message about it, or seeing a flyer posted somewhere, or they're hearing from a colleague about a workshop, and that word spreads organically. We've done some surveys, I'll say, at our campus to try and figure out how are folks learning about our GIS workshops and other data-related workshops in general. And really, email seems to be the primary driver of getting the word out. So always important to consider, and something that the activity will maybe prompt you to think more about as you work on it today. Thinking about which WebGIS topics in particular might be most impactful for your campus community. I'll say that we did spend the most time this week on ArcGIS Online, and that's probably one of the things to think about is how might a workshop on ArcGIS Online benefit those at your campus who are doing WebGIS work or might want to do WebGIS work, and getting the word out to them about what's available. But of course, and Alexa, I think you made a great point there, right? We need to have some information publicly available so that folks know how to create their accounts and they can get set up. And which is another important thing to think about when you organize a workshop like this. Is there anything that you want folks to have prepared coming into it? And I'll mention for us that our process for leading ArcGIS Online workshops changed dramatically after we implemented single sign-on integration, because before that, folks had to request an account in advance to be ready to do hands-on work. They couldn't just come in the day of, not have an account, send an email and have it instantly created. It might be a delay of a few hours or even a few days before they could get in and start to practice and do things themselves. And now they can create their accounts instantly on the spot. You don't have to do any advanced contact to say, please create your account or make sure you have an account ready. They can just set it up right there in the workshop and be up and running in a few minutes. So the technical procedures for accessing some of these resources like ArcGIS Online can also influence the structure of a workshop. The next point here, which is it's a good thing, I think, that workshops tend to drive demand for other services, but you also want to consider impact on reference emails and your consultation load. I'll say, every time after we have a GIS workshop that's well attended, usually they'll, for the next couple months afterwards, there'll be a slight uptick in emails coming in as folks now know who I am. They've seen my face. They feel a little more comfortable reaching out. They have questions about what was discussed in the workshop because they've started using it in their work. And so that leads to more emails and more consultations, and which, like I said, is a good thing. But especially if GIS is not your full-time responsibility, as it is for me. And it's just one of the things that you're focused on, trying to make sure that any work, surrounding workshops is sustainable. And I think this is part of it. And also thinking through issues of sustainability. I mean, do you feel comfortable leading a GIS workshop, right? I mean, is this going to be a huge commitment for you if you haven't done this before, having to prepare new materials, get ready, make sure that you feel confident enough with the things that you'll be covering to be able to lead a full workshop on it? And one of the things that might help here is if there are others on your campus that you might collaborate with. And this is something I've done, quite a few times with workshops, is work together with other folks on campus from different departments or within the libraries, folks who are doing things with GIS. I think actually all of our ArcGIS Online workshops that I've done have been collaborative, where I was just a co-presenter. And I might cover some of the technical part of it of what is ArcGIS Online, how do you log in and set up your account. But then the content side of things, the creating the story map or building the interactive map might be covered by somebody else who has a great example that they can present with nice content to share with the audience, and they'll walk through the audience basically the process of putting together perhaps a story map that highlights a particular project. So having that ability to work with others can be really useful. And make things more sustainable overall. One of the challenges that we all face now, I think, is trying to decide, what workshop format might be ideal for given topics. And I know we're probably still in a virtual mode for the next couple of weeks or months, but as things do finally return to normal, I think we're all going to be set up and fairly prepared to do virtual workshops, just given our experience that we've gained over the last year and a half. But what things work best virtually? Which things really would benefit from in-person interaction? Should workshops be pre-recorded? Does that make it more sustainable for you if you're doing a pre-recorded session? Or is it better to just do it live and then have that interaction? And if you're doing it live, do you do it as a webinar, or do you do it where folks can unmute their mic and ask questions and have that more sort of informal discussion rather than the more formal questions being posted in a chat, for instance? So thinking through and I think this is really topic specific. It's why I mentioned here, because if you're doing things with ArcGIS Online, maybe you think differently about this than if you're doing a QGIS workshop, or you're doing a workshop about libraries databases. And one of the other things to keep in mind, and also I think this ties to sustainability, is that GIS technology changes pretty quickly, but it doesn't change, from month to month necessarily. So sometimes you might need to recreate workshop materials or adjust them to fit changes that have taken place in ArcGIS Online. I know that's something we've had to contend with in the last year or so for our story map workshops, as we rolled out a whole new way of building story maps. So, the old workshop materials need to be adjusted. Our plan for presenting them needs to be adjusted. We need to get familiar with the new story map format. And that also means that recorded sessions, while they're great, it means that folks can refer back to them even if they weren't ever able to attend the live workshop. Maybe they weren't even at your campus yet. They hadn't even enrolled when that workshop was taught, but they can go back and view the recorded session and perhaps make use of it. But at what point does that recorded session become obsolete, and now the information that's presented in it is no longer accurate or correct? So I think you also need to keep that in mind and have a plan for taking things down when they're no longer accurate. So those are just some of the issues that I know I've been thinking about this week as we've been discussing these WebGIS topics and considering how these materials too, right, that we've developed could be used in workshops, and how the knowledge we've gained together could be applied to workshops in the months and semesters ahead. Are there any questions about workshops or thoughts or comments, any ideas anybody's had that have come out of the content we've covered this week? All right, well, I'll mention that if you're interested in seeing any of the workshops that we've run at UT in the last several years that are related to GIS, one of our libguides, to go back to the libguide discussion here for a second, has a full listing of every workshop since 2018, summer of 2018. And for each of these workshops, any materials that were used, whether they be slides or recorded sessions or code, if that was part of the workshop, all of those materials are openly shared here and accessible. So just wanted to mention that this could be something that's useful to you if you want to take a look at some of the things that we've done here at UT, or pull from this too, and see if there's any workshop that you want to kind of run something very similar to it, or if you want to look at the code that was used or look at the workshop slides, feel free to pull from.
Michael, can you put that link in the chat box, please, to that page?
Yes. And this link is also on our suggested resources for today. And one of the things you'll notice about all of the workshops we've ran in the last 2 semesters is that they each have a recording that's available, so you can see exactly how those workshops were structured and run. And that's because they've all been via Zoom. And so this coming semester, I'm right now actually working on our workshop plan and still trying to figure out if we would be doing anything in person, if all our events will continue to be virtual. Are we going to make any adjustments to the format for the events compared to last semester? And I'm thinking we'll probably cut the time down a little bit to make them an hour long, with 15 minutes afterwards for questions and discussion. So each semester, we also distribute a survey for our main workshop series, at least that I've been responsible for the last few semesters, which is our Data and Donuts workshop series. And we send a survey out to everybody that registered to attend to get their feedback about the timing, during the week, the duration of the workshop, what they think of the topics that were covered, or are there any topics they want to see in future semesters. And so we've also found that helpful for guiding our planning.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
How has your traffic been for those workshops? Have you had lots of people attending them, or just a few people, or generally, how is the attendance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say that prior to the pandemic, when we were running in-person workshops, our attendance was pretty steady from semester to semester, with an average of maybe 30 attendees at each workshop.
30?
And usually there would be more attendees for the workshops earlier in the semester, and almost workshop to workshop as the semester goes on, you see the attendance get a little bit lower, and that has been a constant pattern that we've noticed every semester. But there are sometimes occasionally bumps where in the middle of the semester you'll see one topic that is just of particular interest to the campus community, and it might actually go up and reverse that trend a little bit. But overall, we found the earlier in the semester a workshop is held, the more popular or widely attended it tends to be. When we shifted to virtual workshops last year in the fall semester for the first time, really didn't know what to expect. And what we actually saw was attendance skyrocketed. And I think our first workshop last fall had like 90 or 80 attendees, something in that range, far higher than we would usually see for in-person attendance for a workshop at the start of the fall. And that was pretty constant over the course of the semester, was that attendance was higher than average. So I think we had 90, 80, 70 attendees at each of our workshops that semester. And then that was a surprise to us in the fall, but then we kind of came to expect the same thing in the spring. And in the spring semester, attendance was much lower than that. And there were a few issues, the February winter storm being a big one. We had to cancel a workshop in February, move it to later in the semester. One of our workshops got canceled just because of a last minute emergency. And the spring workshop series was unfortunately just, affected by these other events. And as a result, our February workshop got pushed back to later in the semester. And so almost all of our workshops were late in the semester. And when we don't see that high attendance. And I'll also say that spring attendance seems to be a little bit lower than fall. So it seems like the earlier on in the academic year you are, or the earlier on in the semester you are, that's when you have a little more enthusiasm. Folks aren't burned out yet on projects and just everything else that's going on. And so something to keep in mind if you're thinking about timing. I will also mention in regard to workshops, another good opportunity for planning something, especially if maybe you're only aiming to do 1 or 2 workshops a year, is to consider special events like GIS Day, right? An opportunity to take advantage of the fact that folks are thinking about GIS, they're thinking about geography, it's Geography Awareness Week. And it could be an opportunity to have an event run where you're already getting some of that promotion assistance because of other emails and other things that are going out that are letting folks know about GIS activities that week. And it's just perhaps a good time of the year to try and bring attention to what you're doing with GIS on campus.
So I have a question. Oh, you go ahead, Jennifer.
No, please go ahead, Kate.
Oh, well, I was just going to ask, in terms of the modality, the delivery of workshops, do you find that there's a difference between how much content you can cover? Because I know, like, when we've been virtual teaching just library instruction, I've found that it seems like it takes even longer to do stuff virtually. And I wonder, like, how does that affect the amount of content you can cover, or how much assistance you can provide to the participants, since you can't really have that one-on-one face-to-face interaction? Do you have any suggestions or like lessons learned about that, in terms of how much you can plan to engage with your audience?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I'll say that our workshops, for our virtual workshops, have been the last fall semester they were 1 hour, so they ran from noon to 1 o'clock. In the spring, based on the feedback we received at the end of the fall semester in our survey, we decided to make them a little bit longer, so they ran from noon to 1:30. They were 1.5 hours. And then at the end of the spring semester, our feedback was, okay, maybe that's a little too long. And so now we're trying to strike a balance and say, all right, we'll present for 1 hour and have 15 minutes of questions. So I think it should be about the perfect amount for virtual. And that's honestly not all that dissimilar from our workshop length when we were running things in person. But one of the things we have done with the virtual workshops is made them webinar style. So that means that folks, it's not like this where we're just interacting and we can all see each other's videos and we can unmute when we have a question. We've structured all of them as webinars so that we don't see the participants. There isn't that distraction for presenters. We don't have to worry about interruptions, and all of the questions go in the chat. So we've also had a chat monitor for each of our workshops, where the presenter doesn't have to worry about trying to keep track of what's being posted there. There's somebody that will work with the presenter who will meet with them in advance, and if I'm not presenting, usually it's me monitoring the chat, or if I'm presenting, I'll usually ask a colleague for help, and that whoever's monitoring the chat basically will make the call about when to interrupt or interject. And it's usually based on whether it's a particularly pertinent question that needs to be addressed at that time, or if it's something that can wait till the end, we might just hold off on that and revisit it once we hit the question and discussion segment. So I'll say that for total length, I think about 1 hour still tends to work well, just like it would in person. But and I think Josh did a great example of this yesterday with the Python workshop, is that for virtual materials, or virtual workshops rather, providing those materials so that folks have an opportunity to do more hands-on things, I think that's been pretty successful for us. Those workshops where we had that interactive component tended to be our highest attended workshops. And finding ways to keep folks engaged even if we're not there in person, and we can't see them face to face and make that eye contact and walk up to their table if they have a question and assist them there. Giving them a head start so there's less room for error. It's not like, all right, follow along with me as I type, and if you miss anything, you're going to get lost. It's like all the code is basically right there, and then maybe we're going to ask you to make 1 or 2 tweaks to that and see how did that affect the results. And so providing a little bit more help with the content or the work that needs to be done. And we haven't run a workshop that is a lot of manual work where, you know, like, all right, I'm going to navigate through all of these windows and, you know, ArcGIS Pro, follow along with me. That would probably be more difficult to do, honestly, than the coding stuff, because the code you can at least share. You can't share an ArcGIS Pro project that's already like 90% of the way there and then walk them through the rest. It's not quite as easy. So yeah, I think about the different ways you could present material. So for Python, using Colab, for instance, is a huge help. Nobody has to install any software. Nobody needs to have their computer set up a certain way. Everybody can get started at the same time, and you can share the code. Is really useful. Any other WebGIS workshop thoughts?
I just want to affirm what you said, because with us, it's the same thing. When we're doing workshops in person, I can do workshop by myself. I don't need anyone else to help. But when we went online, first of all, we have most of our TAs doing the ArcGIS online workshops. So when we went online, I found out that I had to be there as well, just to be the person, maybe monitoring chat or acting. If somebody has questions, I'll be the person answering those questions. But there was one time when we had to go into a breakout room because somebody was so far behind that we had to go into a breakout room. So the instructor, the TA, went on teaching, and I had to go into a breakout room to help this other person. So that's like the main difference with us when we're doing online and face-to-face. You need to have two people doing the online bit of it most of the time.
Yeah, I'll completely echo that, Sylvia. I think you pretty much do need to have two people to run a virtual workshop successfully. There's just too much to manage and you know, keep an eye on when you're the presenter, if you don't have that assistance. So something to think about. It in some cases, in person might actually be easier if you just have one person that is available to be there for the workshop.
Can I ask a question about scheduling the workshops?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have like a workshop a month, a workshop every week, or how do you plan on scheduling your workshops in general?
Yeah, so like, you know, I'd mentioned GIS Day. We always try to have something now for GIS Day. That's something we started a few years ago, and I think that's something we definitely want to continue moving forward. Is making sure, you know, that opportunity for getting the word out about GIS and providing you know, GIS learning opportunity on the day of GIS Day, that's not lost. But in addition to that, we also have I mentioned our regular semester workshop series that is not necessarily geospatial, you know, but it's a data management focused workshop series. And one of the things that we experimented with the last few years, and this was also upended by the pandemic, but what we had been doing prior to that was having a fall semester workshop series that was general research data management topics. And then in the spring semester, we would have geospatial focused workshops for each of the workshops in that series. So for the spring of 2019 and 2020, we had 6 workshops in each of those semesters, and they were all GIS or, you know, focused on geospatial data in some way. And then this past year, we've had just GIS workshops interspersed. We didn't do you know, a whole semester dedicated to GIS or geospatial workshops. So and I think both approaches work pretty well. We adopted the geospatial, you know, semester style of workshop series when I was working with a colleague on planning the data endowments workshop series, and that's one way we made the workload a little more manageable, was that by alternating semesters. So I would take the spring semester, they would take the fall semester, and then, like I said, just, you know, the pandemic and other changes, you know, meant that we needed to kind of change that workflow, and now we're just interspersing GIS workshops here and there within the series. So I think either approach could work, and it's, you know, also important to consider sustainability in your workload and how you might be able to collaborate with colleagues who can also prepare workshops. Maybe you don't need to have a GIS workshop series, but there's, you know, some sort of technical or data focused series. you can integrate GIS themed workshops in there every once in a while, that might be another way to make everything a little more manageable.
So the way we've done it at here at SMU, like I said, we have TAs doing most of our ArcGIS Online workshops. We have like a workshop every week. Like one day would be like ArcGIS Online, then the next time it might be survey 1, 2, 3, and the other time might be story maps, whatever. So like we're trying to have a workshop, a GIS related workshop each week, the whole semester. So yeah, in addition to the other workshops we have on other topics. But for the GIS workshops, that's how we've tried to do it here at SMU.
That's amazing. How much of a strain does that put on you and your unit to run weekly workshops? How are you making that more sustainable? Is it a new topic every week, or some of these?
No, it's mostly introductory sessions, introduction to ArcGIS Online, and then introduction to story maps, introduction to survey 1, 2, 3, and then like I said, it's the TAs doing them. So we have like 3 TAs a semester. So they each take a turn. This week it's your turn to teach these, and the next week it's somebody else's turn to teach something else. And it's not burdensome. And so it's been fun. Yeah.
So really taking advantage, it sounds like, of having the TAs there to help with that workload, though. It's been pretty important.
Yes. No, it's been fun. Yeah.
I have a question about, Sylvia, are the TAs paid by the libraries, or are they provided in some other way?
They're paid by the library.
And thank you. I mean, we have GRAs, graduate research assistants, and they are primarily focused not as much on instruction or workshop provision, but just helping with the incoming reference and consult requests in all the formats, right? So they're called Ask a Librarian GRAs, but it's great that you have that kind of support. And I think, to echo Michael's indication that having a little more bandwidth and then sharing and growing other people's skills has worked well. And you can see evidence of this if you look carefully at the instructor listed for some of the workshops Michael displayed on his screen. We really do reach out to some of the GRAs that are employed in the branches sometimes beyond the Ask a Librarian GRAs, or other graduate or PhD candidates who interact with Michael or another colleague and seem to have a real interest and are capable of doing that instruction. And then we partner with them so that they have that to put on their CVs, but also so that we have a little bit more bandwidth around what we can do as a part of a series.
Yes, and the thing is, these TAs are just GIS TAs. They're in the lab. So they do most of the consultations, they work in the lab. They're not just the regular TAs we have in the libraries. And most of them, they're all graduate students. They've taken a GIS class that Jesse teaches. So we have like a pool of students that we always know will be interested in applying for this job. So they run the lab, they do the consultations, unless it's something they can't do, then the triage, and then the ones who do most of those workshops. And they like doing it, so it's been good.
Thank you.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and that's why I think this sprint is so great. Getting perspective, from each other and learning about how things are done a little bit differently at other institutions. And Sylvia, you're making me think about what could we do maybe a little bit differently at UT to provide a greater number of workshops, or there are different strategies we could use. And what is attendance like when you have workshops every week? Are you able? It's
not great. It's not like, that's what I was asking you. We don't have like 30 people. We might have like 7, but our school is a small school, so it's like maybe 7, 8 students, attendees, which is fine. But that's how we do it. And we based ours, because we have a close relationship. We work with somebody from Stanford who helps us set up he's been like a consultant to us, and then he says, that's how they've been doing theirs. Every week they have GIS workshops. at Stanford. So he encouraged us to do something similar. So that's how we base our own model on that Stanford one as well. And it's been fun.
Interesting. Yeah, so yeah, you're giving me a lot to think about there. You know, I think that's great to hear about how things are done there at SMU. And yeah, and for us, I'll say that, you know, every semester, I think we've done things a little bit differently. We're always trying to experiment, I think, a little bit, you know, engage, you know, if we tweak this, does that, you know, result in more attendance, or does that make managing the workloads a little bit more associated with workshops more sustainable? And one of the things that Jennifer had mentioned, and I think this is a nice segue to consultations here, is that students, and usually it's grad students or doctoral students, who I find are contacting me fairly frequently for consultations. You know, maybe they contact me 3 or 4 times over the course of a semester or two. Those are students that I might turn to and ask, since, you know, after a few consultations, you build up a little bit of a working relationship, you know, with these students, or it could also be, you know, faculty or staff or whoever is you know, wanting to meet with you to, you know, for research assistance. But I might reach out to them in a subsequent semester and say, you know, based on that project you were working on and you know, the progress you were able to make, and the, you know, the things that you're using, whether it's, you know, ArcGIS Pro or ArcGIS Online or QGIS, would you like to lead a workshop, or, you know, work with me on leading a workshop about a particular topic that you know, is really the focus of your research? And that's worked pretty well too, you know, to make the workshop workload a little more manageable by getting that assistance. And I think it also makes the workshops more interesting when you have that diversity of speakers, and especially folks that can speak about their own project. They're really excited, they're enthusiastic about it. Usually they're using GIS in, you know, innovative ways and doing things that are pretty cutting edge. Yeah, we've had some pretty good success with that. And when you bring in folks from other departments, you know, they promote that to their departments, the fact that they're being involved in the workshop, and it's another way to help promote as well. So yeah, and I'm looking at the time here, and we've gone a little bit longer than I expected we would this morning. This is great. I think this has been a really nice conversation, but I do want to make sure we have time to talk a little bit at least about web consultations, or WebGIS consultations. And one of the things that you know, I hope we're taking away from this week is, you know, having new skills and feeling more confident with the topics that were covered, whether it be, you know, geospatial databases that our library subscribes to, or ArcGIS Online or QGIS or Python and Google Colab. But even if we aren't experts yet on any of these things, I don't think that being an expert is necessary for being able to provide consultation support, right? As long as we have a good foundation and we know how to read the documentation, that is the most important thing. I get asked questions all the time about you know, things I haven't used before, or things I haven't necessarily done in GIS software. It's been a while, or, you know, things have changed since I last used a tool, or you know, utilized a certain workflow. And I'm having to go back and read documentation quite frequently in order to find answers for folks. And I think it's always going to be that way. Even if, you know, we've been doing this for over a decade, you're going to see things change. New software is going to come out. Software will be updated, and tools are in different places, or the names of things change. As long as we have, like I said, a solid enough foundation where you feel confident to offer consultation services, I think it is possible, even if you don't think you can answer every question that might come your way. And one of the things that can help with that, and this is something that I've tried to get a little bit better about too, over time, is coming up with a structured way for folks to schedule consultations, so that I can get information from them in advance that is, you know, requested of them, that is, you know, specifically about what they want to talk about. So now there's a form that folks fill out when they select a time to meet with me, and it asks them to provide information about which department they're affiliated with, this type of workshop or the type of consultation they are scheduling. So is it a consultation about finding data, or is it a consultation about using GIS software? And then it also asks them for, you know, detailed information about what they want to discuss. And I found this has been really effective because it can give me an opportunity to maybe do a little more research on something before I meet with somebody, so that I can go in and maybe I do have an answer ready to give them, or at least I know where to start looking when we're meeting together. And I can say, all right, I know that the answer to your question is probably going to be found on this website or by looking through this documentation. And that can be really helpful as well if you have that opportunity to prepare in advance. And a lot of the questions I'll get are sometimes they're not technical questions. Folks are maybe already pretty confident GIS users, but it might be a question about which options are best for the particular research scenario they find themselves in. And so that's just another thing I wanted to mention here, is that when you're getting asked questions, having that foundational knowledge and awareness of what things are out there can be really useful, even if you're not an expert in using them, because hopefully you can help folks that are coming to you with questions evaluate which tools or workflows might be best for their particular circumstances. So I think a good example, from the content we covered this week, is if somebody wants to create a web map to display the results of their research, would you recommend QGIS for that, or would you recommend ArcGIS Online? What are the pros and cons? It might depend on how ArcGIS Online is configured at your institution. It might depend on how close to graduation a student is. I know sometimes students will meet with me and it's their last semester and they're working on like their last project, and they are considering maybe using ArcGIS Online, but I have to tell them, when you graduate in a month or two, you lose access to that ArcGIS Online account. So do you want to think about maybe a different solution that you can continue to manage and work on and build on after you graduate? And sometimes they say yes, sometimes they don't. But if they are looking for that long-term option and something they can continue to build on, well, then I'll sit down and talk through other options that might be available to them using QGIS, or maybe writing the code themselves for a web map, talk about where that could be hosted, and those types of things. And so one of the other common questions you might get is about QGIS versus ArcGIS Pro. So I think it was great that we had an opportunity to both cover free and open source technology during the sprint, as well as ArcGIS software, which is, both are I think very prevalent. ArcGIS software probably a little more so, although that varies from campus to campus. But I will also mention that there does seem to be growing interest in free and open source software, and definitely an interest in using code to automate things, Python specifically, when we're talking about geospatial work, just because of the nice integration between Python and GIS software. So something to consider there. And to tie things together again and go back to the LibGuide discussion, I'll say that making consultations easy to schedule from our GIS LibGuides has really helped drive consultation appointments, and has really facilitated arranging those and managing that consultation workload, because you don't have to worry about logistics anymore. Now it's just, you get a message in your inbox saying somebody wants to meet with you at this specific time, and here's how they filled out the form that specifies, what they want to talk about, so I can prepare in advance and then be ready to meet with them. I'll just say that, one of the things that we have looked for is hidden efficiencies and ways that we can make everything a little more manageable. And I feel like each semester that goes by, we find a way to tie the workshops and the LibGuides and the consultations together a little more tightly. And it's been great to see those evolve over time and just get a little more efficient and effective. But that's been our experience here. And yeah, I'm interested to hear if anybody has any tips or tricks for consultations that they might be doing on their campus.
We have lab hours. And the lab hours are on the webpage, and there's a link, a Zoom link or link to that page. And then we encourage students or anyone who has a question to drop in during those lab hours. We have a TA working those hours, and then they can talk to the TA if something they're able to work with that at that particular time. The TAs would help them. of the tiers think the need to schedule an appointment for further help, the patron would work with the tier to schedule another appointment. That's just how we did it. And then we also have an email, the GIS support email. So if somebody does not want to go to the lab hour, they can just send us an email if they have questions, and then we'll arrange with them if we need to schedule an appointment with them. That's how it works. But I think having the form, I'm listening to you thinking, oh, maybe that's a good thing for us to have a form associated with that. Or yeah, so but that's how we do things here at SMU.
Oh yeah, that's really interesting to hear about the lab hours that you have, and yeah, something I wonder if we might be able to implement in the future, something similar to that. I'll also mention in regards to the form, one of the things that that we found to be an ancillary benefit of having that form in place, which requires folks to fill out, the information about their consultation in a very structured way, is that when those consultation appointments are scheduled, it sends an email to your inbox with that structured information. And it's possible to actually programmatically go through your inbox to find all the consultation emails and then parse that information that has been provided by the folks that are scheduling the consultation. And you can start to do analysis on your consultation statistics and look at, which topics were covered, how often were you meeting with folks from certain departments, how many consultations did you have scheduled per month or per week. So it's pretty interesting how you can tie certain things together and then find new opportunities for further assessment or improvement. All right, well, I think maybe we can go ahead and jump to our last slide here that I'll just spend a brief few minutes on, and it's about ArcGIS Online administration. And I hope this week has gotten you all to think a little bit more about your ArcGIS Online account, and for you to realize what things you do have access to through ArcGIS Online or do not by default. And hopefully you're all familiar with who your ArcGIS Online administrator is on your campus if you weren't already aware of that, or didn't already have a working relationship with that person and hadn't contacted them previously. Hopefully now you at least know who to reach out to if you do have questions or would like to see changes for your account. But one of the things hopefully we can think about moving forward, and I think Josh's experience at Baylor illustrates how things can change over time, is what role in ArcGIS Online administration on your campus do you think would be ideal for your library? Are you completely happy with the way things are? Do you think that you would continue to be happy with that 3 years from now, 5 years from now? Do you think that it would benefit the library and the campus community overall if the library played a greater role in ArcGIS Online administration, or at least had a say in how things were set up and configured? And once you start to think about that ideal scenario, maybe just lay out a tentative plan for how that could be achieved, right? What are the steps you think you could potentially go through to achieve that ideal arrangement? And I'll also mention that this is one of the optional activities for today, that if you think that ArcGIS Online administration is a possibility, or having a role in that is a possibility for your library or for your position specifically, you can go through the activity and think a little more about that and answer the prompts that are provided. And it will kind of help you think about what changes you might want to see and how you might be able to work towards implementing those. Are there any questions about ArcGIS Online that came out of this week? All right, well, I don't want to take up too much of the time this morning because there's plenty to cover in the activities, again, all of which are optional. And I think I'll probably pull it up really quickly before we break for the morning session in case there are any questions. But I did just want to quickly, have a slide show up here that helps us reflect back on everything we did this week. It was a busy week. I'm so grateful for all of the time that you all invested to our morning sessions or afternoon sessions, the activities. I know it was a lot of work, right? We're coming to the end of the sprint, and so hopefully there'll be an opportunity to take a breather tomorrow and assess everything that we've done and been able to accomplish. But we covered a lot of topics, right? We spent a good deal of time on library geospatial databases and ArcGIS Online, especially ArcGIS Online, QGIS, Google Colab, and Python, of course, within that Colab environment. And hopefully, we've had some positive outcomes here. I think we'll be able to talk more about this afternoon, but I would say at the very least, right, we probably have some new technical knowledge. I hope you're all at least as enthusiastic and as confident as you were coming in, and I would hope more so after this week, where we've had a chance to practice some things, get hands-on experience, and hopefully you're not burned out after a pretty intensive sprint. But excited about doing more with WebGIS moving forward and thinking about how the new knowledge and experience you gain could lead to the development of new resources and services. And I did just want to mention that all of these materials that have been developed will continue to be available. I'll have to check with Alex about the recorded sessions and see if there's any time limit for those. But I'm hoping that those should stay up for at least quite a while. All of the links are suggested resources, the slides and activities. That should remain here in our GIS interest group sprint activities folder, or I should say the sprint folder in general, where we have everything organized. So we'll have all of this available to draw from if we think it would be useful, whether that's next week or next month, or hopefully next year or beyond that into the future. I hope the things that we've spent all this time creating and working on and building out and learning will be able to benefit us, and that these are things that we can return to as needed. So that was really the last thing I had on here. Are there any questions about any of the material we covered this morning before I just quickly show a brief preview of the activity and then maybe turn it over to Jennifer for final comments this morning? All right, so let me quickly show the activity. Like I said, I think this is going to be a fun one. It's not technical at all. It's very much different than our activities from the last few days. But basically what I've set up here is a variety of different prompts that might get you to think about development of new services and resources. So all of these are optional. Some of these might not be relevant to you depending on your position in your library. Others are maybe things that you don't think are things that you might be able to work on right away, but things that you could work towards, or that you think would be interesting to think about. So feel free to select all of these kind of prompts or tasks and work on them, or select one of them that you really want to focus on. It's totally up to you, and everything is optional. So of course, if you don't end up having time today to focus on any of these, that's okay too. But basically, I'll just go through these really quickly. Prompt A is asking about workshop ideas that you might have coming out of this week. And then there are these questions that will hopefully get you to think a little bit more about how you could create a workshop, what that workshop might focus on, how would you structure it, how long would it be, is there anybody you could work with on your campus to put it together, how would you promote it, who would your audience be, and just these types of questions. And if filling these out hopefully will get you thinking more about some of the challenges that might be associated with developing something. And then hopefully when we come together as a group this afternoon, we can share the things that we've come up with and talk about possible solutions for any issues we foresee, or maybe we can just share ideas with each other, and if somebody has a great idea, share that with the rest of the group, and we can all benefit from that. And so I think that will be really interesting for us to hear what we come up with. If you have any workshop ideas, if workshops aren't something that you feel particularly inspired to do after this, or it's not really something that you do much of in your position, perhaps LibGuide creation is something that interests you coming out of this sprint. And so prompt B here is really focused on what things you might be thinking about in regards to development of new LibGuides or augmentation of existing LibGuides. Prompt C is focused on consultation services and might get you to think about how the services that you offer the university community could potentially change based on what was covered here. Are there new services that you want to promote? Are you going to manage or implement consultation services any differently moving forward because of what we learned in the sprint? Prompt D asks about the learning sprint experience overall. So for those of you that are maybe not in a GIS specific role on your campus or in your library quite as much, just what did you take away from the sprint experience in general? Did you think this was a useful format? Are there other types of materials or topics that you think would be beneficial to cover in this type of way with a dedicated few days focused on a limited number of subjects that would be covered? And who might your audience be on campus if you were to run this type of event there locally? And what other things would you need to think about and from a logistical perspective consider to put something like this on if you were just doing it on your campus? And the last one here is about ArcGIS Online organizational account administration. Is this anything that you foresee your library having a role in the future? Is it something you would want your library to have a role in? And how might you work towards configuring your account at the very least to have permissions to everything that you think are important within ArcGIS Online? So if you can't geocode currently, do you want that? And how would you get that ability? Accessing notebooks or having more credits, whatever you think would be important, how can you work towards achieving that? So those are all of the prompts. Like I said, if you just wanted to focus on the ArcGIS Online administration one, or sprint planning, or workshops or libguides, you can pick from one of these. You can pick 3 of them or 2 of them or all of them or none of them if you don't have time, and we can just come back together this afternoon to hopefully discuss some of the ideas that we've had as we work through the activity. Are there any questions? All right, so one final thing I'll mention here, and it's in the instructions, is just please, when you go to work on this, just make a copy of it, either as make another Google Doc that you can edit in your account, or save it down as a Word doc or something that you can work in, so that we don't edit the original copy, since everybody does have editing privileges in here. But yeah, just make sure you make a copy, and then it's totally yours. And also, I'll say that if you don't feel like sharing, that's okay too. I mean, really, the whole point here is just to brainstorm and to benefit you and give you an opportunity to think about how you might benefit from having gone through this workshop and develop these new skills. And yeah, so it's totally up to you to work on this as much or as little as you'd like, and then share as much or as little as you'd like afterwards. All right, and that's everything I had for this morning. Jennifer, is there anything you'd like to add as we wrap up this last morning session of the sprint?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for all of that content for this morning. I feel like you carried us through that last mile of our sprint and helped us cross that finish line. Now, before we break for the morning session, I just want to say thank you to those of you who have been completing the end of day surveys. That's some really rich information, particularly in, as Christina and I developed those surveys, we thought, oh, we're asking a lot of people because we're leaving a lot of open text boxes in those end of day surveys, and we intended for them to be brief. But as you found time and had capacity to share, it has been incredibly helpful. So I just want to say thank you so much for the survey feedback. We try to be or practice reflection in my department and generally in our division at the libraries. And I find that it is so challenging sometimes to carve out the time to do that when you're just trying to get through things and get to the end of a task or check that box on your to-do list. But I'm grateful for all of the prompts and framing that Michael has provided, because as I have done that coming out of seminars and events like this in the past, when it's still fresh in my mind and I do have ideas, it has been so fruitful for me to document that, even in shorthand form, so that I can be sure I remember what I meant, and then look at that and have it as a guide over the course of the next semester or year. And trying to determine, well, what's practical. I always have really lofty expectations or aspirations, and sometimes I winnow those back, but the kernels are all there if I take the time to document those. We'll have an opportunity to reflect a little bit more or return to some of the assignments. I don't know about you all, and this came out in the open text box feedback, more so as the week progressed in those end of day surveys. It's hard to fit it all in. And if you're like me, you have some unexpected things that pop up during your day and you get drawn into meetings or people need to see you, and it's always time sensitive. So you can't always completely focus in the way that you thought that you might. So I'm going to return to at least one of my assignments that I didn't get to and try to finish that today as well. When we come together this afternoon, we'll reflect as a group, as a cohort. And I look forward to that. We will also have one last survey to ask you to complete. It'll be a little bit longer, but Michael asked some really good questions earlier about what you thought of this model and this approach to learning. The other thing that I'd like for you to consider too moving forward, and we talked about this with regard to workshops that we might configure and offer. You know, this seems ideal for a virtual offering, in part because we are all in very different places and different spaces, and yet we're able to do these things together synchronously and asynchronously to really, you know, I feel like it has a sense of progress. We've run the course, we've sprinted, and we've all won. So thank you again. Michael, I was going to mention, I did not see or hear any mic distortion today.
I was just going to ask that. You brought up the survey again, and it made me reflect back on that. And so I bet it's the desk I'm using. So I think it's probably not the computer then, because how often was it doing it in previous days?
Like 3 or 4 times, sometimes in pretty close succession.
Yeah, I bet it's just this unique desk I'm at, which I'm planning to shift to a different desk in the next couple of weeks elsewhere in the house. So hopefully that'll fix the issue. Hopefully it's not the service, but thank you so much for helping me figure that out today. And I hope that continues. If I just present this way, I won't have those audio issues. So appreciated.
Of course. Any last comments or thoughts?
This
All
is
right.
just so awesome. I've really enjoyed all of it and learning all the options and everything. So thank you all.
Yeah, I would second that, and I know Josh isn't here, but all of our instructors have been just incredible, and so I really appreciate all of the time that everybody's taken to put this together for us. And I hope if we do it again, then more people would be involved, because I think it's a really valuable resource. So you know, it's great. So thank you guys so much.
Yes, thank you.
Well, you know, I mentioned at the outset that one of our planning group wasn't able to participate this week. And as it turns out, there was a death in her family. She would have been so excited to participate and would have brought her own very rich and varied experiences and perspective to the week. I do think that it's helpful that this was a small cohort experience, and we kind of framed it as a pilot so that we could learn from the experience. But I'm hearing that being echoed in the results of the daily surveys as well. So I think that's something to consider. We had at the very outset imagined what our audience size could be, and we were going to have a cutoff so that if there were X number of registrants, after that, we would not accept others. So I think maybe that's something else I would be interested in hearing from you all about this afternoon. What do you think could be a reasonable number without being too few or too many. And I'll end on that note. You guys are just the perfect example of what we were hoping for in attendees and participants. So I'm going to reflect back some of that gratitude and appreciation onto you for hanging in and running that last mile.
Okay.
Well done.
Thank you.
See you this afternoon.
Bye. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.